Most gardening videos are lying to you about rabbit manure. They tell you to drop raw pellets in a bucket of water, wait 2 days, and pour it straight onto your plants. Do that, and you will drown your root system in anaerobic pathogens, invite mold colonies into your soil, and potentially set your vegetable garden back weeks. I know, because I watched it happen. And I have also watched the correct method transform a sickly, yellowing tomato plant into something you would not believe in under a week. What I am about to show you is the exact, science-backed process for making a genuinely potent liquid fertilizer from rabbit manure in 48 hours without creating a bacterial swamp that destroys everything you work to grow. Pay attention to the smell test alone, because that single step will save your garden. Before we get into the method, let's establish why rabbit manure even deserves this conversation in the first place. Because not all animal manures are equal, and the difference matters enormously for how you use them. Rabbit manure sits in a unique category. Unlike chicken manure, horse manure, or cow manure, rabbit droppings are what horticulturalists call a cold manure. That means the nitrogen levels are high enough to be genuinely useful, but low enough that you will not immediately burn your plants if you work it directly into dry soil. This has given rabbit manure a reputation for being the gardener's best friend, and that reputation is largely deserved. But here is where the internet gets it dangerously wrong. People see cold manure and assume it means safe under all conditions. It does not. The cold designation refers to its nitrogen concentration relative to other manures. It does not mean the pellets are biologically inert or pathogen-free. Raw, uncomposted rabbit manure still carries bacteria. Under the right conditions, specifically in standing, unmoving water with no oxygen, those bacteria shift from aerobic, plant-beneficial organisms to anaerobic organisms. And anaerobic bacteria produce compounds toxic to plant roots: hydrogen sulfide, volatile organic acids, and other metabolites that cause root cell death and open the door to fungal diseases like pythium, which gardeners know as root rot. The other myth that needs addressing immediately is this idea that raw pellets fully dissolve and release their nutrients in 48 hours of cold water soaking. They do not. Rabbit manure pellets are dry, compressed organic matter. Even in water, they soften and begin to break down on the surface, but the core remains largely intact. What you get in 48 hours of passive soaking is a mildly nutrient-tinted water with a growing population of anaerobic microbes. What you need is a method that genuinely extracts the available soluble nutrients fast, while keeping the microbiology in your favor. That method exists. It is called Actively Aerated Compost Tea, or AACT, and it has been used by commercial organic growers, permaculture practitioners, and soil scientists for decades. It does not require any expensive equipment. The entire setup costs under $20, and when it works correctly, you will be able to smell the difference between a healthy batch and a failed one before you ever pour a drop on your soil. Let's go through it step by step. The single most important concept in this entire process is oxygen. That is the foundation of everything. The reason passive manure water steeps fail, and fail dangerously, is the absence of dissolved oxygen. In still, stagnant water, aerobic bacteria consume the available oxygen quickly and then die or go dormant. The organisms that thrive in low oxygen conditions are the anaerobes, and those are exactly what you do not want near your plant roots. The AACT method solves this completely by introducing continuous forced aeration through the entire steeping period. An aquarium air pump, the kind you find in any pet store for under $15, pushes air through a weighted air stone at the bottom of your bucket. That constant stream of fine bubbles does two things simultaneously. First, it keeps dissolved oxygen levels high throughout the water, which creates the ideal environment for aerobic bacteria to multiply rapidly. Second, the physical agitation strips soluble nutrients from the manure pellets far more efficiently than passive soaking. You are not just letting nutrients slowly leach out. You are actively pulling them into solution while cultivating the exact microbiology that makes those nutrients available to your plants. Here is why this matters at the biological level. Aerobic bacteria, the beneficial kind, are voracious reproducers under the right conditions. Given warmth, oxygen, water, and a carbon food source, populations can double every 20 to 30 minutes. In 48 hours, you are not working with a small population of microbes leached from the pellets. You are working with a thriving microbial community that has colonized the liquid, broken down complex organic compounds and converted them into plant-available forms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That is not passive steeping. That is accelerated biological processing, and the distinction is everything. Now let's talk about the actual recipe, and I want to be precise here because the proportions matter. You are working with living biology, not a paint-by-numbers chemistry set, so there is some natural tolerance for variation. But get the core ratios consistently right, and your results will be consistent. Here is the complete setup. Step 1. Your water. Fill a standard 5-gallon bucket with water, but do not use water straight from the tap if you are on a municipal chlorinated supply. Chlorine is added to city water specifically to kill microorganisms, which is exactly what you want in your drinking water and exactly what you do not want in your compost tea. Chlorine will damage or kill the aerobic bacteria you are trying to cultivate. The simplest fix is to fill your bucket the night before and leave it uncovered. 24 hours of open-air exposure is enough for residual chlorine to off-gas naturally. If you are on a well, you can skip this step entirely. Step 2. The manure. Take 2 cups of rabbit manure pellets and place them inside a fine mesh bag, a paint strainer bag, a piece of fine burlap, or an old nylon stocking. All work well. You want the bag porous enough to let nutrients and bacteria pass freely into the water, but tight enough to contain the solid matter. Why contain it at all? Because loose pellets in your brew create debris that clogs sprayer nozzles if you plan to use this as a foliar spray. And more importantly, they make the finished tea murky with undissolved organic matter that can still harbor pathogens. The bag keeps the process cleaner and the output more consistent. Step 3. The molasses. Add 1 tablespoon of unsulfured blackstrap molasses to the water. This is non-negotiable if you want an active, living tea in 48 hours rather than a weak, slow nutrient leachate. The molasses functions as a carbon food source fuel for the aerobic bacteria you are trying to multiply. Bacteria need 2 things to reproduce rapidly: a nitrogen source, which your manure provides, and a carbon source, which the molasses provides. Together, they give the microbial population everything it needs to explode in numbers during the aeration window. One critical detail: it must be unsulfured blackstrap molasses. Sulfured varieties contain sulfur dioxide as a preservative, a compound that functions as an antimicrobial agent and will actively suppress the bacterial growth you are paying for. Step 4. Aeration. Lower your air stone to the bottom of the bucket, run the tubing up and over the rim to your pump, and switch it on. You want continuous, strong bubbling for the full 48-hour period. Do not stop the pump to check on the brew, do not turn it off overnight to reduce noise, and do not skip this step and substitute it with occasional stirring. Intermittent aeration is not sufficient. The moment you stop, the airflow, dissolved oxygen levels begin to drop, and the microbial community begins shifting away from the aerobic species you cultivated. Continuity is the key. Set the bucket somewhere with moderate ambient warmth. Between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit is ideal. Avoid direct, intense sunlight, which can superheat the water and stress the bacterial community. A shaded outdoor spot, a garage, or a covered patio works well. Then set a timer for 48 hours, not 36, not 72. The 48-hour window is when the aerobic bacterial population is at its most active and the nutrient extraction is near its peak. Beyond 72 hours, even with aeration, the tea begins to shift as the food sources become depleted, the microbial population crashes, and the chemistry becomes less predictable. At 48 hours, you are going to do something before you pour a single drop of this tea anywhere near a plant. You are going to smell it. I know that sounds basic, but the smell test is the most reliable, most immediate diagnostic tool available to you. No equipment required, no guesswork. And what you smell will tell you everything you need to know about the health of your batch. A successful batch of actively aerated rabbit manure tea will smell earthy, slightly sweet from the molasses, and rich, reminiscent of fresh, dark forest soil after rain. Some describe it as smelling faintly of a well-maintained mushroom bed. That smell tells you the aerobic bacteria are alive, dominant, and active. You may also notice a light, stable foam on the surface, not a thick, foul-smelling scum, but a light, airy froth from the biological activity. That foam is a good sign. Now for the failure modes, and I want to be direct about this, because understanding failure protects your plants. If your batch smells like sewage, like a stagnant pond, like rotten eggs, or like ammonia, it has failed. Do not use it on your plants. These odors are the byproducts of anaerobic metabolism. Hydrogen sulfide is responsible for the rotten egg smell. Volatile fatty acids produce the sour, sewage-like odor. Ammonia signals protein breakdown by the wrong organisms under the wrong conditions. Applied to your soil, a failed batch does not just fail to feed your plants. It actively introduces harmful microbial populations directly to the root zone and can compound existing soil health problems. If your batch fails the smell test, do not discard it down a drain. Pour it onto an active compost pile where the composting process will neutralize the anaerobic population and the material can still break down safely. Then troubleshoot your process. The most common failure causes are chlorinated tap water that was not properly dechlorinated, a pump that was too weak to maintain adequate dissolved oxygen throughout the full 48 hours, or ambient temperatures that were either too cold, below 55 degrees, or too hot, above 90 degrees, and stressed the aerobic bacterial community. Adjust the variable that caused the failure and try again. Before we get to application, it is worth taking a moment to understand exactly what is in a successful batch of rabbit manure tea, because this is not generic plant food. The specific nutrient profile of rabbit manure is what makes it particularly well suited to this method. Before we continue, if you're enjoying practical gardening content that focuses on what actually works instead of internet myths, take a second to subscribe. It helps the channel tremendously, and you'll never miss future guides on soil health, composting, backyard farming, and sustainable growing methods. Rabbit manure has a higher nitrogen content than horse or cow manure and a reasonable phosphorus level for cold manure. That nitrogen is primarily in organic form, bound in proteins and amino acids, which is exactly what the aerobic bacteria in your AACT process are designed to work on. Their enzymatic activity converts those organic nitrogen compounds into ammonium and then into nitrate, the form plants absorb directly through their root hairs. The AACT process is not just extracting what is already soluble. It is actively converting insoluble nitrogen into plant-available forms in real time. The phosphorus in rabbit manure is particularly relevant for root development, flower formation, and fruit set. Potassium supports overall cell function, water regulation, and disease resistance. These are not trace contributions. A properly brewed batch of rabbit manure AACT is delivering a genuinely balanced liquid fertilizer that addresses multiple nutritional needs simultaneously. And because it is liquid and microbially processed, the nutrients are in a form that plants can begin absorbing within hours of application, not days or weeks, as with a dry amendment worked into the soil. You have a successful batch. It smells right, it has the right color, dark amber to medium brown, translucent rather than opaque, and the foam is clean and light. Now the question is how to use it without overloading your plants. This is the step most people get wrong in the opposite direction from the steeping. They brew correctly and then apply too heavily, thinking more is better. In soil biology, more is rarely better. Appropriate is better. Dilute your finished rabbit manure tea at a ratio of 1 part tea to 5 parts dechlorinated water. This gives you the equivalent of what is sometimes called weak iced tea in color, pale amber, barely tinted. That dilution rate is appropriate for root drench applied directly to the soil around your plants. For most vegetable crops, tomatoes, peppers, squash, leafy greens, apply once every 10 to 14 days during the active growing season. For younger seedlings and transplants, stretch that interval to once every 14 to 21 days and be conservative with the volume per plant. Because rabbit manure is a cold, lower nitrogen manure relative to poultry or high-concentration liquid synthetic fertilizers, this diluted tea is genuinely burn-resistant on healthy, established plant foliage. That makes it one of the rare fertilizers suitable for use as a foliar spray, applied directly to leaf surfaces in the early morning or evening when temperatures are cooler and plants are not under heat stress. Foliar feeding is faster than root feeding for addressing deficiencies because the leaf absorbs nutrients directly through its stomata, bypassing the soil uptake process entirely. For foliar application, strain your diluted tea through a fine cloth before loading it into a pump sprayer to remove any residual fine particles that could clog the nozzle. Apply until the leaf surfaces are lightly coated but not dripping. Do not apply in direct midday sun. The combination of heat and liquid on leaves can cause scorch even with a mild fertilizer. Early morning application allows the tea to be absorbed before the heat of the day and reduces the window for any fungal issues that can occur when leaf surfaces remain wet. Now let's talk about the most common ways experienced gardeners still manage to ruin a batch or apply it incorrectly, because these are not beginner mistakes. Some of them are the exact kind of thing that happens when you have been gardening successfully for years and start assuming your intuition overrides the biology. Mistake 1. Stopping the airflow. This is the most consequential error in the entire process. Some people turn the pump off overnight to reduce the sound. Others turn it off briefly to stir the batch or check on it and forget to turn it back on. Even 4 to 6 hours without aeration in a warm environment is enough to allow anaerobic conditions to take hold. Once that shift happens, you cannot reverse it by restarting the pump. The anaerobic population has already established itself. The smell will eventually confirm it, and the batch needs to be discarded onto a compost pile. If pump noise is a concern, move the bucket further from living areas or use a longer air tube. Do not interrupt the aeration cycle. Mistake 2. Using sulfured molasses. Not all blackstrap molasses is the same. Sulfured varieties are treated with sulfur dioxide during processing to prevent fermentation, exactly the wrong property for your purposes. If the molasses label does not say unsulfured, assume it is sulfured. This single substitution can significantly reduce bacterial activity during the brew, resulting in a far weaker tea with less microbial inoculation and reduced nutrient conversion. Check the label before adding it to your bucket. Mistake 3. Applying undiluted tea directly to plants. Even rabbit manure tea, made with a cold manure, is highly concentrated straight out of the bucket. Beneficial microbes in the tea can outcompete or disrupt the existing microbial ecology in your soil if applied in excessive concentration. Mori is not more in biological systems. Dilution is not waste, it is calibration. The 1:5 ratio gives you the right concentration to supplement and support your soil biology without overwhelming it. Mistake 4. Brewing in direct sunlight or in very cold temperatures. Aerobic bacteria are temperature sensitive. In cold conditions, below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, bacterial metabolism slows dramatically, meaning your 48-hour window may not be sufficient to build an adequate population. In excessive heat, above 90 degrees, the water can develop temperature gradients that create warm anaerobic zones in the lower column, even with aeration. The ideal brewing temperature range is 65 to 80 degrees. In cold climates, brewing indoors or in a greenhouse in the cooler months is a practical solution. Mistake 5. Applying to drought-stressed plants. Drought-stressed plants have compromised root function, their root cells are partially desiccated, and their membrane permeability is abnormal. Applying a microbially active liquid fertilizer to drought-stressed roots can cause fertilizer burn at concentrations that would be completely safe on well-hydrated plants. Water your plants thoroughly the day before applying rabbit manure tea. Let the soil be moist, but not waterlogged at the time of application. If you keep rabbits, even just 2 or 3, as a small backyard operation, the math on manure production is genuinely remarkable. An average adult rabbit produces approximately 1 pound of manure pellets per week. 3 rabbits give you over 150 pounds of manure annually. Even accounting for what you use directly in garden beds and compost systems, that volume is more than enough to sustain a regular AACT brewing schedule throughout the entire growing season and still have material left over. For most home gardens and small market gardens, A single 5-gallon batch brewed every 2 weeks is sufficient to treat a garden in the range of 400 to 800 square feet when applied at the recommended dilution rate. If you have a larger operation, simply scale the number of buckets running simultaneously. The process and the ratios remain identical. Use a dedicated aquarium air pump with enough output for the number of buckets you are running, or use individual small pumps for each bucket. Multiple smaller pumps are generally more reliable than one large pump powering multiple air stones through a manifold. Storing unused diluted tea is not recommended. Once diluted and removed from aeration, the microbial community begins to decline within a few hours. Use your diluted tea within 2 to 3 hours of mixing. Undiluted finished tea can be kept in a cool, dark location for up to 24 hours with some loss of microbial activity, but the nutrients remain largely intact even as the living component declines. For optimal results, brew on a schedule that matches your application window and use the batch fresh within the same day it finishes. Here is the part of this process that most gardeners never hear about, and it is the part that changes how you think about fertilizing entirely. The nutrients in rabbit manure tea are valuable, but the living component, the aerobic bacterial community you cultivated over those 48 hours, may be even more valuable than the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium combined. Healthy soil is not a growth medium. It is an ecosystem. A single gram of biologically active garden soil can contain hundreds of millions of bacterial cells representing thousands of species. These organisms form relationships with plant roots, exchanging nutrients for carbon compounds produced by the plant through photosynthesis. Some species fix atmospheric nitrogen. Others solubilize phosphorus from mineral forms that would otherwise be unavailable to plants. Others produce plant growth hormones. When you apply a well-brewed AACT, you are not just feeding the plant directly. You are inoculating your soil with a fresh population of organisms that support and extend the ecosystem your plant is already relying on. This is why soil treated regularly with living inputs, compost, worm castings, aerated compost teas, performs differently over time from soil fed exclusively with synthetic fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers are soluble salts. They feed the plant directly but contribute nothing to the soil's biological community. Over years, synthetics can actually disrupt that community by creating nutrient concentrations that are toxic to sensitive microbial species. This is not an argument against synthetic fertilizers for immediate correction of specific deficiencies. It is an argument for understanding that soil biology is a long-term investment, and rabbit manure AACT is one of the best low-cost, high-return investments you can make in it. The last piece of this is timing, not just within the 48-hour brewing cycle, but across the growing season. Understanding when your plants most benefit from a liquid biological fertilizer like this one helps you use your rabbit manure supply strategically rather than randomly. Early in the season, during the seedling stage, and at transplanting, apply rabbit manure tea as a root drench to help establish the microbial community in the root zone from day one. Transplant shock is partly a function of disrupted root-to-microbe relationships. Introducing a living liquid fertilizer at transplanting gives those relationships a head start and can measurably reduce transplant stress. Do not apply to seeds directly before germination. They do not yet have root surfaces for the microbes to colonize, and the liquid can interfere with germination in some conditions. During the vegetative growth phase, when plants are expanding leaf area and building structure, the nitrogen fraction of your rabbit manure tea is doing its most useful work. Apply every 10 to 14 days during this period as a root drench. Once your plants transition into the flowering and fruiting stage, shift your application timing and consider supplementing with a potassium source in the soil. Rabbit manure's potassium content is relatively modest, and fruiting plants have elevated potassium demands. Rabbit manure AACT is an excellent vegetative fertilizer and a solid all-around supplement. It is not a complete fruiting formula on its own for heavy-producing crops like tomatoes, squash, or melons. Late in the season, as plants begin to wind down and you are transitioning to soil restoration, Apply a final root drench of rabbit manure tea before turning or covering your beds. The bacterial inoculation applied now will continue working through the fall, breaking down organic matter in the soil and building reserves for the following growing season. Some growers also apply rabbit manure AACT to freshly turned compost piles to accelerate the composting process by inoculating the pile with a fresh aerobic bacterial population. This is a practical and low-cost way to speed up decomposition when you are working through a large seasonal compost addition. The garden does not reward shortcuts. It rewards systems, consistent, biologically sound practices repeated over time. Rabbit manure AACT is one of those systems. Done right, it is one of the most affordable, most effective, and most sustainable fertility inputs available to a home grower. None of that requires a complicated setup. It requires a 5-gallon bucket, a $15 aquarium pump, some mesh bags, a tablespoon of the right molasses, 2 cups of rabbit manure, and 48 hours of patience. What it also requires, and this is the part that actually separates successful organic growers from unsuccessful ones, is an understanding of why each step exists. Not just what to do, but what happens biologically when you do it. Because when you understand the mechanism, you can troubleshoot your own failures, adapt to your specific growing environment, and improve your results with every single brewing cycle. 2 cups of manure, 1 tablespoon of molasses, keep the oxygen flowing. That is the whole thing. If you found this guide useful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because we publish practical, science-backed gardening and homesteading content designed to help you grow more food, improve your soil, and avoid the costly mistakes that hold most gardeners back. And if you've ever made rabbit manure tea before, or you're planning to try this method for the first time, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what results you're seeing in your garden. If you know another gardener who could benefit from this information, share this video with them. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.